There have been a lot of legendary game launches. The anticipation behind games being followed up by an amazing delivery is such a beautiful thing in the gaming world. But today, I want to focus on the bad ones. These are the worst launches in gaming history. Whether it be an unfinished mess or nothing like what was advertised, there have been a lot in recent memory. And sometimes you're left asking yourself, what the hell were they thinking releasing this to the public? Also, we're focusing on the state of a game on launch day, meaning some of these games have made a comeback. If there's one game on this list that gets caught in the crossfire of hate despite being an amazing game, it's definitely Cyberpunk 2077. I want to go ahead and share that my personal experience with this game at launch was totally fine, and that's because I played this game on PC. When I say I played this game at launch, I really mean that. It was like right at midnight, and I really did enjoy like the first 4 or 5 hours I played before going to bed. So when I woke up to absolute pandemonium surrounding Cyberpunk, I was pretty surprised. IGN in one of their famous game reviews gave this game a 9 out of 10, which on a side note, I probably somewhat agree with actually. But the console version of Cyberpunk at launch was a complete and utter disaster. The graphics looked absolutely horrible, NPCs glitched in and out of existence, and collision in general, more specifically when driving, was all over the place. It was so bad that IGN actually had to rename their review of Cyberpunk 2077 to Cyberpunk 2077 PC review just because of how misleading it was. What's really sad about this release is that it was one of the most anticipated games at the time. CD Projekt Red was coming hot off the massive success of The Witcher 3, so people had high hopes for Cyberpunk. The game took roughly 9 years to develop, and it took so long that we had now entered the next generation of consoles, being the PS5 and Series X, but that didn't change the fact that they were still developing this game on PS4 and Xbox One, which in my opinion just could not handle the heat that Cyberpunk was throwing at them. The development simply outaged or outlived the console and the hardware that it was being developed for. Except for PC, honestly, like I said, the PC launch was no worse than like any other AAA release these days. If anything, maybe a little bit better. I know that sounds crazy, but 2077 scratches that RPG shooter itch for a lot of people. I know it's not everyone's game, but it's still just a really solid game all around. I think this launch was so bad that tons of people wrote this game off as a bad game and never got around to playing it. But let me tell you, they definitely turned this game around for the console players. I know my friends say it's like totally fine now. And also with a 2.0 update that kind of like overhauled the entire game, like there's no better time to play than now. Before GTA Online was the absolute behemoth it has become today, I bet a lot of the new school folk out there forgot the game didn't even launch with the online portion. As a matter of fact, there was an entire 2-week window before GTA Online was even added to Grand Theft Auto 5, meaning the strip club was extra lonely for that 2-week period. I had beaten the game in this 2-week period, so I was pretty excited to share in the debaucherous activities GTA had to offer, but with some of the homies now. And then launch day came and I got stuck with this infamous screen. Not being able to load into the game you're actively trying to play on launch day is one thing, but this is just the tip of the iceberg. If you're one of the few people who actually got through the infinite loading screen loop, you were then met with a tutorial which was riddled with bugs and whatnot, which is one thing, but oftentimes your progress wouldn't save when you logged off, and when you got back on the next time, you had to bypass the infinite loading screen of death again, and also redo that stupid tutorial. By the way, I think this tutorial doesn't even exist in GTA Online anymore. I think that's how terrible this was. It was like 30 to 45 minutes after doing the loading screen of death. But I would go as far to say that the loss of progress in GTA Online was honestly just like a gameplay feature at launch. I remember specifically once I got cut loose to play the game, I got like $50,000 saved up for a new car, and then I logged off, and then the next day logged back in to load in, not only with like less than $10,000 in the bank, but also like my player level was completely reset to like level 4 or something. It was crazy. And for me personally, this was enough to take the wind out of the sails for like the foreseeable future for GTA 5, because these problems wouldn't be fixed for over a month after launch, and that also includes like general server stability and just like making the game playable on top of saving it in the first place. But as far as the gameplay itself, it was also lacking in that department. There were rumors going around stating that all you needed was an upgraded apartment for heists, only to realize after doing so that heists weren't in the game whatsoever, and also wouldn't be in the game for another 1.5 years. And that's what I was most excited for. I definitely felt misled. It was probably like disclaimed somewhere, but I totally thought I was going to be able to like go rob a bank with some of my friends. But like I said, this game was just empty. Really, all you could do was just go on like massacres, which is fun. Everyone loves doing that in GTA. But outside of that, there was like the same 8 missions, which just felt like fetch quests and like not really full-fledged story quests whatsoever. And then you could race, which was fun. And like I've already established like GTA racing is like fire or whatever. Also, I know this technically isn't its own game, but to me, it became such a massive icon and is so successful that it's pretty much treated as its own entity at this point. And I think it goes without saying, GTA Online bounced back pretty well from this. Honestly, maybe even a little bit too good for their own good. Battlefield has been on a steady decline over the last decade at this point, and Battlefield 5 really wasn't the worst thing ever, but definitely not a step in the right direction. And since EA is notorious for disappointment, there was a lot of anticipation behind 2042. And I'm not gonna lie, when I played this game's beta, I was pleasantly surprised with what I played. And it was a beta, there was plenty of issues with it, but I did cut them some slack in that regard, probably a little bit too much. And then the full game came out and it was basically the same exact thing as the beta. The glitches were game breaking and made it an unplayable experience for many. Collision, servers, driving, all of it was just absolutely terrible. Obviously, glitches are enough to make a game unenjoyable, but then you also had some of the worst decisions and changes made to this game. Bloom is the biggest one that I didn't really know about at first. For those that don't know what Bloom is, it just turns like your gun have this like random RNG recoil pattern. Fortnite's like the biggest game that really like is known for having it. And to me, it basically just turns every gunfight into a slot machine pull. I don't know, I hate it so much. Like CSGO has a recoil pattern, but that's the thing, it has a pattern you can like control, whereas Battlefield 2042's Bloom was just like completely random and all over the place for no reason. And this is like a big change to like the way the game is played. It'd be like if you went and bought the new Gran Turismo game and instead of racing cars, you're racing like horses. Then you had the operators, which essentially replaced the whole entire class system that Battlefield was known for. I always liked being the fat kid with the LMG laying waste down a hallway, and now that fat kid can use a sniper and also a wingsuit. Another promising feature behind this game was the portal, which is basically this game's like sandbox mode, which on paper the Battlefield franchise could definitely use something like this. All the assets that Battlefield has to offer in like a sandbox mode is just like a really good idea, but even this also fell flat on its face. There was barely any content, and also as far as I remember, like the portal wasn't even usable for like the first month because of how terrible the servers were. There's way more to why this game failed, but you probably already knew that. I will say 2024 has actually bounced back very well, which is nice to see. Maybe well isn't the right word for it, but just better. I would love to see the Battlefield enter a redemption arc because 2042 definitely was not it. Overwatch 2 is another game that's been on the decline, and honestly, with Marvel Rivals, their fate may be sealed at this point. Overwatch 1 may have had one of the most successful launches of any game in history, but then they followed it up with one of the worst launches in gaming history. Overwatch 2 was already doomed to begin with lead Jeff Kaplan stepping away last second, and many fans, myself included, seeing no need for a sequel. It's no wonder this game flopped. Like GTA Online, many people had a very difficult time just getting into the game to begin with. This screen was notorious for the first like 2 weeks of this game's launch. The queue times were insane, and then once you got into the game, you'd be lucky to stay in the game for longer than an hour. And then if by some miracle the stars aligned for you and your friend to get on the game at the same time, if they invited you or you invited them, you get an error message saying that you're on the wrong version of the game. Outside of difficulty getting into the game, Overwatch 2 also took a completely different approach from the original, and that it was now going under the free-to-play realm. And with that meant if you were an owner to Overwatch 1, you would load into the game with like 10 heroes available in total and have to unlock each of them gradually, which is like some Battlefront 2 loot box level of greed going on. And honestly, this method of free-to-play does not work for a hero shooter like Overwatch. For games like Apex Legends, which are battle royales, I think it's still stupid, but it works a little bit more, or at least makes a little bit more sense. But for a super competitive game like Overwatch, it just falls totally flat. I knew Overwatch 2 was gonna flop, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I was like wanting it to. This game had a chokehold on my life for like 2 or 3 years, and that is absolutely like not an exaggeration. And honestly, Overwatch 2 probably deserved its failure, and my life is definitely better without this game. The 76th installment in the Fallout franchise was met with a lot of anticipation. Things were going online for Fallout, which Bethesda isn't really known for. But Todd Howard assured us that 76 was the most ambitious project Bethesda has ever tackled, and assured that it was going to be the biggest game they'd ever developed. And in a true Todd Howard masterclass, that was all just like a blatant lie.
All of this just works. It's not, I'm not kidding.
The game launched with extreme bugs and glitches, and I'm not talking the fun and quirky Bethesda glitches we know.
How are you? Been better. How about you?
It's things like T-posing enemies, disappearing NPCs, shading and texture issues, server crashes, and much, much more. And on top of this, the quests and things to do are practically non-existent. I mean, seriously, what was promised was just not here at all. Any other Fallout game before this had way more to do, and if anything, 76 was the least amount of content we'd seen in a Fallout game. But to top the over-promising and under-delivering of an unfinished product, we have the infamous nylon bag scandal. With most games around this time, there was always going to be like some special edition version, and Fallout had a $200
Power Armor Edition.
It came with some fun knickknacks and collector's items, one of which was a canvas bag. Well, once launch day came and players got their
Power Armor Edition.
they quickly realized that this canvas bag was a much cheaper nylon bag, which is just the cherry on top for this whole entire game's release. Players obviously weren't too happy with their nylon bag since it looked nothing like what was promised, which sounds a little bit familiar for this game too. And once people contacted support, their excuse was that it was too expensive to produce, so they went with the nylon bag instead, which obviously is not a good excuse, but let's say that is the reason. Why did the price not change alongside with that? But if you complain enough, they did give you 500 V-Bucks, which is like $5 in their like digital currency for the game, which on a really funny side note, you actually couldn't even buy like that nylon bag in game with those points. But 6 months later, if you continued to bitch and moan, they did send you like the actual bag that was advertised, so that was really cool. Honestly, not really. The damage is already done, and if they thought this was going to get people to play the game, I mean, that's just wild. The game was a ghost town failure, and like last I heard, and this is like a long time ago, they added battle royale to the game. This was a while ago, but I remember just hearing that and I was like, this game is just done for. That just shows you how out of touch Bethesda is with their audience, and like really has been for the last couple of years. Jedi Survivor kind of had the reverse effect that Cyberpunk had. A disastrous launch with unacceptable bugs, but for whatever reason, this time it was on the PC version and not the console. And now my role as a PC gamer had turned against me. I started playing this game and I made it through the prologue, and then I hit like my first like actual in-game cutscene, and then my game just totally bricked. So then I tried it again and it bricked again and again and again. And I actually like, for the first time ever in like the last 5 years, I hit a point where I legit could not progress the game in a single player game because of a glitch, which sucks. I was pretty excited to play this game. I liked the first one, and then Jedi Survivor comes around and it's just like a total buggy mess. Anyways, this game launched inside the same window as Tears of the Kingdom, so that was definitely enough to make me forget about this game. I heard it's great and I played a little bit here and there, but this was one of the worst launches I've witnessed in recent memory. The timing here is really unfortunate because this like really rocky PC launch was just getting in the way of my obsession with like the Korok genocide. Who would have guessed that EA would make it on this list multiple times? This time we're talking Anthem. I honestly forgot about this game entirely. Its whole identity was like the game that's supposed to be EA's comeback. And if anything, this was EA's coffin for its reputation for the rest of eternity. Now, technically this was developed by BioWare and only published by EA, but that doesn't really make things much better when you consider the absolute turd slide BioWare had been riding coming off another disastrous launch. That being Mass Effect Andromeda. Anthem was basically a direct competitor to games like The Division and Destiny, which in my opinion, those games both had like rocky launches and took a while to get where they are today. And that's because when you take a jab at the old like live service model, I mean, you're just not going to get it right at first. It's going to take time to develop, and EA really could not afford like a up here, but they had one anyways. This game had so much hype around it. I mean, really not hype. It was more like discussion, if you will, and it just fell flat on its face. Apparently the development for this game was an absolute hellscape. Like the entire gameplay for this game changed several times, from early builds seeing more gameplay from like a looter shooter vibe, and then others seeing like Dark Souls vibe. I don't know, the whole thing just sounds like an unorganized mess. But a launch did occur in 2019 to where a lot of people just wish the game was canceled entirely. There's basically like no real campaign and just like a really stale gameplay loop, which were like two of the biggest promises from this game, which ultimately resulted in the lowest scoring BioWare game of all time. They tried to undo the damage to no avail, as the game had already been dead on arrival. An overhaul or like 2.0 version of this game was promised, but also actually got canceled. That's like how bad we're talking here. I think the whole sci-fi like looter shooter open world like game there just doesn't need to be any more of them. I know we really only have Destiny, but just like leave it to the devs who do it right, like Borderlands. We've already established one really bad launch in the Grand Theft Auto franchise, and the definitive edition of these games is no different. When it was announced that 3 beloved classic GTA games were getting a remaster, people were pretty excited, and it was all in one bundle. Launch day came and I loaded up the Rockstar launcher only to see that the entire page for the definitive edition was nowhere to be found, despite me seeing it advertised days before on that same exact launcher. Yeah, that's because this launch was so bad they removed it from the store because they did not want people to see it. Once I realized this, I did some research and quickly realized the caliber of the situation we had going on here. For starters, when you hear the word remaster, you think like a fresh coat of paint and like a really good looking game, but it's like an old game though. Well, this remaster looks worse than some of like the fan-made remasters of Ocarina of Time and like Unreal Engine 5. And I want to make it clear, I'm not insulting like those people who make those, because they actually look really good, but at the end of the day, you can like tell that it's fan made, but this doesn't even look that good. This looks like so clunky and like unorganic. Everything about this remaster is just terrible. Like, dude, this is a AAA studio we're talking about here. So what? The remaster isn't that good looking. That's not the worst thing ever. For some, maybe not, but for everyone, there's a laundry list of visual glitches when the game does actually want to function correctly. Textures don't load in, shadows and lighting can give you a seizure, and just a plethora of glitches that give the players an incentive to just play the original games instead. The Definitive Edition was Rockstar's attempt to keep the player base busy while waiting for GTA 6, and thus outsourced the project to Grove Street Games, who then beat the hell out of the franchise with the same door that made Squidward handsome, and then decided to launch it the very next day. Seriously, there is no way they did any type of beta testing before launching this package. And to me, this is the biggest blemish on Rockstar's record, that they would even let this happen. For the most part, they released pretty good games, and I would go as far to call them one of the greats. But the Definitive Edition is like almost unforgivable. The Master Chief Collection is probably one of the greatest collections of older games we've ever seen. Taking every mainline Halo title before Halo 5 and squeezing it into one title is an insane value for the time. Well, unfortunately, the multiplayer side of things saw an unplayable state for the first like several months. And when I mean unplayable, I mean you literally could not find a match despite several thousand players being online and in a queue.
It's been 20 minutes of searching. Nothing. Not a single match.
Welcome to the Master Chief Collection, where you get a black screen of death every 5 seconds, and then you spend your time just sitting here waiting.
There is not a single title on this entire disc that's working to form right now. Not a single title. That's the 343 guarantee.
Ironically enough, the only game that functioned like somewhat properly was Halo 4, which I doubt like anyone was buying the Master Chief Collection for Halo 4. But if you did endure the several hour queue times, by the way, that's also not an exaggeration. I think it went up to like, there's stories of like 3-hour queue times. When you finally did get into a game, it'd be a super buggy mess. The servers were terrible. The hit detection was terrible. Everything just did not work. And the worst part about this was Halo 3 was the one who suffered the most. And Halo 3 is the whole reason I bought the Master Chief Collection, so I was pretty damn disappointed. For games like Cyberpunk and GTA Definitive Edition, these issues are still really bad, but for a game like Halo that somewhat relies on multiplayer engagement, it's important that these issues be fixed. So why on earth did it take nearly 4 months for something to be done about this? And look, I get it, game delays suck. To get blueballed by a developer to play your favorite game or like, you know, a new game, not a fun feeling. But I will take the blue ball over this any day of the week.
I don't know why, but I think that they made it worse.
MCC seriously should have been delayed at least 6 months because this game had such an awful reputation despite having one of the most impressive lineups for games for a $60 price tag. But those are the worst launches in gaming history. I find it funny that only 2 of these games were like true single player games. The rest were either remasters or multiplayer games, which I think like kind of sheds a light on how those types of games are just like totally neglected. But what other games do you think failed horribly? I'm sure there's some I missed or some like I never really played, so I'd love to hear y'all's opinions down below. Also, quick shout out, I've only uploaded 1 video on this channel so far and it did pretty well. And if you're one of those returning viewers or subscribers, thank you so much for the support. And also, if you're watching this just for the first time, also thank you for your support. But anyways, if you liked, leave a like. If you didn't, leave a dislike, and thank you so much for watching.